Hey guys, I'm Whitney, a personal injury attorney on a mission to help you make safer and more informed decisions about beauty. After representing women harmed by dangerous cosmetic products and procedures, I have realized that the beauty industry is full of dangerous risks and side effects that are unknown and not talked about enough. On each episode, we'll dive into all the latest beauty trends and discuss how we can stay safe in a sea of potions and procedures promising youth and beauty. We will explore real-life stories, legal insights, and advice from the experts. From Botox to BBLs to toxic products in your makeup bag, we're going to talk about it all. My goal is for you to leave every episode with the information that you need to stay safe, beautiful, and informed. You're listening to the Beauty Justice Podcast. Hey guys, welcome to this episode of the Beauty Justice Podcast. I have two special guests here with me today. I have Maddison Johnstone and Michael Fraser. They are the faces behind Operation Redress, an organization advocating for reform in various sectors. And they're here today to talk to us about some of the work that they have been doing to push dramatic change in the advertising laws around cosmetic surgery in the country of Australia. They are also the host of the podcast Surgery Secrets, Beauty's Dark Side. It is a fascinating podcast, and I highly suggest that you all check it out. But we have lots to talk about today, so let's get started. Welcome to the show, guys. How are you?
Great. Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much for having us today.
Thank you so much for being here. I'm really excited to talk to you all today. Can you guys just kind of introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about the work that you are doing with respect to the cosmetic surgery industry in Australia, and just a little bit of background of how did you get into doing the work that you're doing? Tell us a little bit about you.
Thank you so much. We are consumer advocates, consumer and worker advocates, actually. So we've been working together for about 8 years, disrupting the franchising sector predominantly, and trying to help franchisees in unprofitable situations and workers who are being underpaid, often as a result of those unprofitable situations. And we've done that by exposing really large chains in Australia. So franchises like 7-Eleven, Domino's Pizza, and other ones that aren't really known to international countries. And we were doing that for several years, and we got a lot of change. The franchising sector went through its own sets of reform over a few years. And by 2020, our focus shifted to the cosmetic surgery industry. Michael, you can take the lead.
Yeah, so we're always working, and it was evening. Maddison stepped out, and this whistleblower from the cosmetic surgery industry called up and was actually talking about wages. But when we started, I was talking to him, and I realized that the issue was much bigger than wages. And he said we should really be looking on social media because social media is out of control. So we jumped on social media, started looking, and neither of us wanted to get into this, but Maddison especially did not want to get into this space. We have no interest in it. But when you look at the advertising, you're compelled to do something. And sometimes I think of us in a way where we've got like a particular set of skills that we've been able to get laws changed in multiple areas or get the discussion started to change the laws. And we felt we had a duty to do it because we know how to get this stuff done. And there's not really anyone exactly like us in this space. So we took it upon ourselves to get the advertising laws changed and more. And we have done that. And now there's more rules coming for the non-surgical space. So we're loved by injectors all over the country for that, because it's impacting their business model to actually be more ethical. And that's really, we actually want to take this conversation globally, like challenge the thinking behind how doctors are advertising, how nurses are advertising these procedures, because they're really designed to make you feel bad about yourself. And even if the doctors are not intentionally doing that, they're just copying each other. And that the result is that, we look at this stuff. I feel bad when I look at it. I'm always thinking now there's something wrong with me. So the advertising needs to stop, and we want to get that discussion going around the world.
I know that we definitely
are lacking severely in regulations around advertising in the cosmetic space here in the US. And I'm sure many other countries, are seeing a lot of these same things. So when you guys first started looking at the ways some of these surgeons were advertising on social media, what were some of the things that you were seeing that concerned you?
I think the biggest one for us was just the graphic nature of the surgeries. And I remember thinking, how is this legal? How is it legal for doctors, sometimes even plastic surgeons, to be operating essentially live to an audience, a global audience often, including children and young people? How is that right? And it seemed like they were really going for that shock factor of the real graphic surgery. So I'm talking like open surgery, live tummy tucks, where the patient's awake and you're watching patients like laugh into their open wound. And it's just really, really shocking for us to, as people who aren't from the industry, to watch that happen on a systemic level. And then there was sort of the other side of that where these surgeries were being so glamorized. So you'd see the really beautiful woman in a bikini on the beach, bronzed up, hairstyled, makeup, looking beautiful and not sure what she's had done, if she's had anything done, but the caption would be steal her look, come in and book surgery with us. Like that's achievable, or like that's achievable through surgery. So these two ways were sort of the main things that we had a problem with, but there were lots of things that we had problems with.
Yeah.
We were talking today, actually, there was surgeons in Australia, even plastic surgeons, having champagne nights and doing photo shoots with their patients in lingerie for their website. And we thought, yeah. They pour the champagne, they have them around, they make them feel all pretty and put them up on the website. And they had such a problem when we got the laws changed that a group of plastic surgeons, as part of their litigation, actually sued the medical board to try and stop the new rules. They lost. But
Wow.
it's because that stuff impacts sales.
Yeah. Wow. I think, what you guys are talking about with sort of these live surgeries and videos of the surgeons, in active surgery. I see a lot of that all the time where, it's now almost like it's a movie production for a lot of these surgeons because they need that content for their social media. And we're seeing this in every industry. I mean, it's anyone who has a business now, you have this pressure, like you need to be on social media, you need to be advertising. People want to know what you're doing behind the scenes. But I think there's a big difference when we're talking about someone who's, a realtor versus someone who is a plastic surgeon and you're actively, you have a patient on the operating table, you're cutting them open. I think that there's a little bit of a difference there. And there is, I think, a major lack of discernment in what is appropriate, what is not appropriate. And when we don't have any regulation, we don't have any set guidelines or rules, it's just everybody's out doing whatever they feel like doing that day. And I know recently we had a surgeon, I believe she was in Ohio, and she actually ended up losing her license, but she was a surgeon who was actively doing these live Q&As like during her surgeries. So she's got somebody on the table, she's cutting them open and she's streaming it live on TikTok, answering questions from viewers. And, she ended up having a bunch of patients with complications and issues. And after the investigation, they ended up taking her license away. But, a lot of people were coming out after that saying, well, this isn't fair that she should lose her license over this. And they made such a big deal about the TikTok and the live Q&A and all those things. And, a lot of people were saying, well, there's no rules against it. So why is she now getting punished and getting in trouble for doing this when we have plastic surgeons that are all over the country that are, doing very similar things? Maybe they don't have as many issues with complications and things like that getting reported. But I just think that when you don't have rules and you don't have guidelines, you're going to have a lot more problems. And so I'm just curious kind of what you guys have seen. So let's talk a little bit about, there were laws that were passed in Australia, right, pertaining to how cosmetic surgeons are able to advertise. Can you guys tell us when those laws went into effect and just kind of some of the key points of what that regulates and what the new rules are?
Clarify on that. So the way it sort of works here is we have what's called the national law, and then the regulator can put guidelines under that law. And I think the reason it works like that is because every time they want to change the advertising guidelines, they might need to change the law. So the law permits them to establish guidelines and update guidelines. So there were guidelines in place, but they were not being enforced by the regulator really, and they were very dated. So what we pushed for was a new set of guidelines that was much stricter. And the things that we tried to address in that were things like sexualizing your patients, like that had to be said. And I think we had the regulator on our podcast, and he was sort of saying, well, we didn't think some of this stuff needed to be said because it's pretty obvious, right? And there were things around that, the kind of language that's being used. Do you want to elaborate on the language and things like that?
So just to start with, these new guidelines were introduced on 1 July last year, 2023. They replaced guidelines from 2016, I believe, which social media wasn't as prominent back then as it is now, certainly not for businesses, and things like TikTok didn't even exist. So they desperately needed a refresh and an update. I don't think it was just because of all the media that was happening around that time. They were out of date and they needed to be updated. So they went into significant detail about the way that surgery was being advertised on social media specifically, because that was where the bulk of the issues were. And yeah, there's like a whole range of different language now that can't be used. Mummy makeover, something that is constantly used everywhere, and that's now banned here. You're not allowed to use it at all. And that's because when I first heard the term mummy makeover, I literally thought it was women after they have given birth, they're treating themselves to a spa day essentially. And then I learned that it was actually very invasive surgery. And I think the idea of calling it a mummy makeover makes it seem like it's not a big deal, when it's actually something you can die from. And by using these kinds of phrasing to sell surgery, they're also making women feel like they need to change the way that they look as well. Like you give birth, you need to come in and have a makeover because there's something wrong with you. You need to fix that. And when you have some of the most trusted people in our society setting that standard by using that language, you're actually telling every single other industry that that's okay, that that's allowed, and women should be bouncing back, and they should be bouncing back quickly, you know. And I had a personal problem with that, and I felt like that was something that needed to be banned. So I'm sure you have a lot of examples there that you'd love to talk about.
Well, you just said the mommy makeover, so now we have this whole new craze going on right now that keeps popping up everywhere for me, which is a menopause makeover. And so that's like a new big term that is being added. I don't know if you guys have heard. Well, I guess they're banned there, so surgeons in Australia should not be using that phrase. But yeah, the menopause makeover is now sort of all the big rage here in the U.S. and it's, targeting all sorts of different body parts. Yeah, I think that's very interesting. So that is completely banned. They cannot use the term mommy makeover. What are some other terms like that I guess now are banned that would have been permitted before?
Bingo wings, which it's like this here. I don't know. Probably can't
we
see
call
that.
them bat wings here.
Yeah. So those, they're banned. Hip dips as well. So the very natural dip that happens in lots of people's bodies has been made to be like an unflattering kind of look by society. It's like an unrealistic beauty standard that many people are trying to achieve by eradicating the hip dip.
They call it pathologizing language.
Yeah.
Anything to suggest that there's something wrong with you if you don't fix that.
And the thigh gap as well. That's another one that's banned.
There's also things like emojis are now banned for cosmetic surgery advertising, and that should flow through to the non-surgical as well. So one of the reasons the regulator actually we hadn't thought of, and that is that it's a shortcut. And in medicine, you shouldn't be taking shortcuts. But we felt that it glamorized, they would say like, oh, check her results, and it would be flames after it. And it's really
Fire emoji.
Like lit, or hot.
Yep.
Yeah. It's not appropriate for medical advertising. And actually, I'll go to something later, but I'll go back to you.
Wow. Okay. So no emojis, no terms like hip dips. That's really crazy to me that a regulatory body was able to be convinced to ban these things, because I truly feel like if anyone tried to ban any of these terms in the US, there would be like a civil war, I think. I just can't imagine being able to pass any kind of regulation to that extent. You know what I mean? I think that there are people here that are trying to make changes, but the changes that are able to be made are so minor and so small that it almost seems sometimes like it doesn't even make a difference. How did that even happen? Like, who actually creates these guidelines? Is it the regulator, or somebody else creates them?
The regulator works in conjunction with all of the boards. So we have like the medical board, the dental board, the nursing board, and the regulator works in conjunction with all them. So AHPRA has their own sets of rules, but then all the boards will create their own sets of guidelines, and they're all legally enforceable.
With the cosmetic surgery, it concerned, because it was about surgery, so it concerned the medical board and our regulator we call AHPRA. That's the acronym for it. So those two, so they worked on those guidelines together. But with the non-surgical, because nurses are involved, so there's other boards. There's the dental board and the nursing board, and that's still being worked on now. But I think it's important to note that these changes don't happen easily. Like I said, we have 10 years experience in this, in getting things into, front page news, having politicians at a point that they want to have change. So it wasn't just us, there was important whistleblowers involved. We lobbied politicians. We did a lot of media. We did 3 1-hour shows on mainstream media, like on TV. It was front page news. There were many stories. There was a lot that really shocked the community into wanting to get this change. So it's taken over 3 years of our life to get where we are now on this project. It hasn't been simple, and it's been, very stressful too.
Yeah, I can imagine. Just having, started doing a lot of the research and things that I've been doing and looking into, I've realized that it is a very tough industry to make change in. It is a very tight-knit industry when it comes to the surgeons and the different boards. They are very, I would say, hesitant to call each other out on some of the bad behavior. It's very hard in even, legal cases. There's a huge shortage of plastic surgeons that are willing to participate as an expert witness in these cases, because they don't want to speak out against each other. They don't want anybody coming after them and saying, well, you're doing something wrong or something that's inappropriate. So I think that it's tough, and I can only imagine some of the things that you guys have probably dealt with in, working towards getting these changes made. There were a few other things when I was looking at some of the regulations that kind of stood out to me. One of the things is, I guess, they banned any kind of financial incentives for getting surgery. Am I correct on that? Like if they're offering, if you sign up for a surgery by a certain date, you get a discount or something like that. Did I read that correct?
It's probably coming under what the foundational law is called the national law. And under the national law, they've got this section that has a few points of things that you can't do. And one of them is that you can't encourage the indiscriminate or unnecessary use of regulated health services. So inducing someone into getting surgery by offering some financial benefit or whatever it's likely to be the underlying principle. So even though the guideline might say something different, the guideline is informed by the national law.
That's not the case here. I think we see all the time, surgeons advertising sign up by this date and you get a discount, all sorts of things like bundled surgeries. If you buy a BBL, you get a boob job on top of it for X amount of dollars. And they kind of like combine these different surgeries into little bundles and make it like it's this great deal that you're getting. So that kind of advertising is not permitted in Australia.
No, that's not allowed. Bundling, selling, like it's basically like, would you like fries with that, right? It's like,
Right.
you can't do that you can't do that anymore. And that was happening a lot here as well. The bundling of surgeries, they've tried to make that quite clear that you shouldn't be doing that as a regulated health professional, as a doctor.
Something really interesting happened that was almost completely unrelated, and we almost missed it. So in Australia, under the national law, you can't use testimonials in medical advertising.
That was one of the things I wrote down, testimonials. I wanted to talk to you guys about that.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt you.
So what happened was we are going about trying to get all these rules changed, and then someone who's like a very important person in this story, won't name them, but it sent us the testimonial law change that they were going to be allowed. But the person who sent it to us thought the opposite was happening. So they were excited. Look, they're going to be banned. They didn't know they were banned. And we read it and we dropped everything. And because there was a parliamentary inquiry happening in the state in which the founding principle legislation happens, and then the other states take it on. It's a bit weird. So we immediately got everybody we could that had substance to object to this change, to remove that. So it was a prohibition. They were removing it. And there was a telehealth company in Australia, was the only company trying to push for that. And they're doing like erectile dysfunction pills online, pretty much almost all automated to get the pills. There's a doctor clicking buttons and talking to them on the other end, but they don't meet the doctor. So that happened. So we pushed and pushed and pushed, and the regulator was not even with us on this. They were supporting the removal, and we got them all to backflip. And so we got the prohibition to stay in place, but it took a lot of work.
So currently there is still the ban on testimonials. Thankfully, that was going to be overturned, but thankfully the ban remains, and we have huge problems with testimonials being used to advertise any regulated health service, really, not just cosmetic surgery. But with cosmetic surgery specifically, it's an unnecessary medical service. So and they're really powerful. Like I'm always convinced by testimonials. It's one of the first things I do before I spend money on a product is I look at the reviews, and they're very powerful. So when you have patients jumping on Instagram saying, "Oh, I love my surgeon, the best surgeon in the world. Look at how great my body looks. Look what he did there. Look what she did there." It starts to be very convincing, and especially if they're influencers, so they have a following that trusts them, that trusts their opinion. They have so much power to convince people to get surgery who may never have otherwise considered it. So using these testimonials in advertising very invasive, risky medical procedures is very problematic because they often don't mention the risks in their testimonials. It's literally one person's opinion at a point in time, and that opinion can change while their results are still becoming clearer. So, we had huge problems with testimonials. And even though they were illegal in Australia, they were being used all the time on Instagram especially. So it was really good that the regulator cracked down on that.
I've heard a lot of people say that, their surgeon offered them some kind of substantial discount or something to allow them to be able to, film this testimonial video and post it on their social media. So you're saying that's banned across Australia for all medical professionals. So do you guys have websites? Like, here we have all of these like WebMD and some of these different sites with testimonials. Are those banned in Australia?
No. So to be clear, any kind of regulated health professional, they can't use testimonials in their own advertising. So they can't put them on their social media, on their websites, in ads, but people are free to leave Google reviews or other third-party platforms as long as the professional does not control the platform. Patients are still able to leave reviews, basically.
Okay, I gotcha. So, I mean, and that makes sense because, you're going to an unbiased platform, you're posting a review because you want to post it and you truly had this, amazing experience versus the surgeon has given you some kind of an incentive and then they're posting it on a platform that they control, which is something that happens all the time. And a lot of people don't realize that a lot of these Facebook groups and, different groups online are controlled by either the surgeon or the surgeon's office, the cosmetic provider. They're the ones that are in control of it. So just as anyone can post a good review on there, these people can go on and delete any bad ones. If somebody goes on there and says they had the worst experience of their life, well, guess who's controlling that Facebook page? It's the surgeon, and they're just going to have their office administrator delete it. So there's definitely a huge lack of transparency when it comes to, these online reviews. So I think that is really, really interesting that you guys kind of have that prohibition on surgeons being able to post testimonials on their own, social media, so on their websites, anything like that. They're not allowed to do that. Something else that I saw that I thought was really interesting, and correct me if I misunderstood this. They're not allowed to say a specific drug name, like a pharmaceutical drug name in their advertising in Australia. Did I read that correctly? Like they're not allowed to use the actual word Botox if they're advertising that they offered Botox?
It's funny you mention this because there's a lot of uproar right now about this very thing. The TGA here, the Therapeutic Goods Regulator, they have really cracked down on that in the cosmetic injectables industry of injectors using Botox, hyaluronic acid, and any other regulated medicine in their advertising. Yeah, so that's why we're sort of grinning because they're very upset about it at the moment. But it's always been banned. It's been banned for a very long time.
For someone who is a provider and that is what your service is. That's what your service is. You inject Botox, you inject fillers. How would they be permitted to advertise that service to the public?
So the TGA doesn't want anyone advertising prescription medication of a certain schedule to the public. So if you're providing like antidepressants, you're not supposed to be advertising them. They just don't want them advertised. But they're trying to work with the industry as well to help make sure that their businesses can still, so people looking for certain treatments, they know basically if you have a problem, you shouldn't be just going, oh, here's some Botox for that problem. You should be assessing them. So selling Botox might not be the right solution for that patient. As a regulated health professional, you should be assessing your patient on what they present, not just saying, I have Botox, you can have Botox, you can have Botox. Their problem might require a different treatment. I don't know if you have anything to add on that one.
Yeah, further to that, they were also very focused on the fact that you shouldn't be the one as a customer or a patient deciding what you need. If a regulated health professional is having to prescribe something to you, when you go to your doctor in Australia, you don't go to your doctor and say, I think I've got this problem, give me this drug. You say, this is what's happening. Doctor does all the things, takes your blood, whatever, and says, okay, I'm going to prescribe you this, or you don't need anything. So people are going to them saying, I want 30 units of Botox in my forehead. And so they really just want you talking about the problem. So the practitioner might say something like, have you got concerns about the wrinkles on your face? Come and talk to us for a consultation. So they're more leaning towards that being the kind of advertising that should be allowed.
Okay, that makes sense. And that's very, very interesting. Very, very different from, how things are advertised here.
So just to be clear, no one here can advertise prescription medication. And I know in the US, it's very common to have TV ads of drugs. We're not allowed to have that here. So it's across the board. I think the TGA is just trying to bring the injectables industry back in line with the wider medical sector because they were sort of going off and doing their own thing, more like a beauty service and less like a medical service.
Yeah, that is really interesting because, if you watch mainstream TV in the US for 15 minutes, you're probably going to see, several advertisements for drugs, and it's always targeted towards, do you have blah, 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 blah. This is the drug that's going to fix you. And then you see that as the patient. And so, yeah, you're right. You go into the doctor and you're like, I really want to try this drug. And, you're kind of pushing your provider towards what drug you think you need versus going to the provider and being like, hey, these are the problems that I'm having. What would you suggest I do with your medical training, versus what I just saw on an advertisement on TV. So I'm really kind of blown away right now by the advertising rules around medicine across the board in Australia. I didn't realize that there were these strict regulations even outside of the cosmetic area. So something else that I saw is there's kind of a big push towards not creating any of these advertisements to target people under the age of 18. What kind of what does that entail within these laws? Like what are the checks to make sure that these cosmetic surgeries are not being advertised to children, basically?
So they have to age restrict their Instagram profile. And if they're able to age restrict their advertising, they should be doing that. That's essentially what they're doing. But I think they don't want you to be targeting children for certain surgeries as well. So when we first started looking at this, a big surgery that we found was happening, especially on TikTok, or the otoplasty. So with ears sticking out. And I understand kids can get bullied for this, but I don't think kids need to be told that it's an issue. It's like if they feel like it's affecting them, they're going to speak to their parents. Their parents might go to their general practitioner. They might try and see whether there's something else that can be done before just jumping straight into surgery. Whereas when you were watching these TikTok videos, you just had kids who had there wasn't any sort of significant deviation from normal ears, right? They were just normal ears, and kids were getting them pinned back because they felt, I think after watching these videos, they felt like there was something wrong with them because apparently they stuck out too much. And I think the regulator really wanted to crack down on that type of advertising because it was just happening all the time, and it was being marketed as a really simple, safe procedure. But since then, a lot of children and adults have come forward saying they experience pain to this day after having those procedures, and they wish they never got them done.
Wow.
So yeah, they're really trying to stop that.
Well, the something relevant to the US actually is the most, as far as we're aware, the most followed cosmetic doctor in the world on TikTok was an Australian doctor, and he was part of that first set of doctors that we were researching that got exposed. So the regulator actually he had over 13 million followers, and the regulator actually banned him from advertising any kind of cosmetic surgery at all. And he had to delete all his content. And that's never happened before in Australia. So, but he was regularly doing those videos about the otoplasties, and you'd have people under the age of 18 in those videos. And,
wow.
And now there's a class action against that set of doctors, and there's over 1,040 people in that class action.
When we're talking about targeting kids and, there's so much on social media that is so scary, even for adults, like in the back of our minds, we know a lot of these things are not right, and we know that we're being persuaded and well, I guess maybe some people don't know, but, for me personally, I have read a lot about the impact of social media on our brain and, what happens when we're constantly seeing these images of before and after pictures and all of these different advertisements, like you were talking about earlier, that are pointing out something that's wrong with you that probably before you saw that advertisement, you wouldn't have even known that was something that you needed to worry about. And when we have things that are being targeted towards kids, that really, really scares me. As a mom, you think about the impact of that on their brains and, their sense of self-worth, and just, I don't know. I don't know what the answer is in all of this. And this is something that I've really been debating a lot lately, because it's like, where do we draw the line? Where is a line drawn? yes, plastic surgery isn't going anywhere. Cosmetic procedures aren't going anywhere. How do we draw the line to where, I don't know, where do we draw the line? Like that's what I've been really grappling with lately with so many of these different issues, whether it be the advertising, whether it be the actual procedures themselves, like where do we stop? When is enough enough? Is a little bit okay? Should we just ban all of it? There's just so much gray area here, but I do believe, when we're talking about kids, they have absolutely no business seeing anything like that where, something physical, some kind of physical attribute is going to be criticized and, where we're going to be causing them to be self-conscious and thinking that they need surgery. And what you're just saying about, TikTok and this surgeon having all those videos on TikTok. I recently went to a conference and I listened to an attorney who is involved in all of these lawsuits with social media, suing TikTok and Snapchat and Instagram. They got lawsuits against everybody. But he was showing us some of the videos that were being targeted to some of these kids who were, 12 years old. Teenagers. And I literally, I'm getting goosebumps right now thinking about it because it was so disturbing. And, I guess I live in my own bubble of whatever the algorithm is feeding me. And I think we just don't realize, for the kids, what kind of things are being fed to them. And you guys kind of saying this is actually, that wasn't even on my radar that, some of these plastic surgery videos would be actually targeting children and surgery specific to kids. So that's really, really alarming. And just to touch on something else that Maddison, I heard you talking about this on another podcast, but you were talking about this whole phenomenon with the Barbie Botox. I know you seem very, very passionate about the Barbie Botox, and I've had my own issues with that in the past. Can you just kind of give us a little bit of insight on what your thoughts are on terms like Barbie Botox?
Thank you for bringing up Barbie Botox. It was my favorite topic a little while ago. Yeah, it was infuriating to watch. Everybody got swept up with Barbie. We got swept up with Barbie, loved it, loved the movie, great message. But I think when you're advertising in a way which goes against that message of what the Barbie movie was trying to send, and now you're telling people that they need to fix themselves, I mean, you're hijacking a movement, basically. Mm-hmm. You're hijacking a movement. And I have a similar problem with using hashtag body positivity, hashtag body neutrality when trying to sell injectables and cosmetic surgery. It's a similar thing. I mean, we're idealizing it, suggesting that you can either look like a doll or you can look like Margot Robbie. I mean, that's what people are thinking. That's what people are wanting to achieve when they hear Barbie Botox. And none of these ads ever mentioned the risks. They never mentioned how long it might take to get results. They never mentioned that you need to keep going back to maintain the results. So everybody just got swept up in this craze and thought that it's fun, it's glamorous, we're going to look beautiful, and we're a part of something trendy, And I had a big problem with Barbie Botox as well. Yeah. And actually, Barbie is banned in Australia for cosmetic surgery, so you can't use Barbie to advertise cosmetic surgery here. Gray area whether you could use it in injectables. You can't use Botox. So, I mean, they were already breaking the rules. And that was also frustrating, was that they were blatantly breaking the rules and nobody was doing anything about it as well. So
that was just leading into another question that I wanted to ask you guys about is who is enforcing these regulations? Are they being enforced? What kind of punishment? I mean, what happens to a plastic surgeon if they break one of these rules?
The regulator, APRA, is the one responsible. And what they traditionally did, and I think we did a fairly good job of encouraging them to change their way, was they would receive a complaint. This ad is not compliant. they would look at it. There could be 50 non-compliant ads with that company, but they would just say, fix this ad. So they were reactive to a complaint. We pushed and pushed and pushed for them to be proactive, so looking for the problems. And they actually established this cosmetic surgery enforcement unit, and they put $4.5 million in it for the first year, and they started being proactive, going out there and looking for it. But to be fair to the practitioners, actually gave them a bit of time to sort of get their advertising in line, and a lot pushed back, and a lot still are pushing back. And so one by one, there's been practitioners actually getting, it's starting light. So it sort of starts with a letter. At the end of the day, and we agree, regulator doesn't want to be fighting with anyone. They just send the letter and say, can you fix it? People take it down, no problem, they go away. But if they refuse to, or they keep breaking the rules, then they can actually run the risk of having advertising restrictions. So they can be like, you can only say who you are and your phone number or nothing until you've gone and done the proper education and, found your way back to ethical practice.
Wow.
What can happen next is we don't know, because it hasn't happened, but they're sort of getting to a point now where the next thing could be actually being banned from practice or not being able to advertise for a year. So if they're on the second set of conditions. So that's sort of what's happening. And practitioners are really pushing the boundaries here. And some of them, they've been told you can't use the word art, which is one of the terms that's banned. You can't say you're an artist or sculpture, sculpting art, women out of art or whatever, that kind of thing. So some will put like a replacement character in the word art. They'll do a star and they'll just go a star T. So it's really, really like cheeky sort of, I've complied. I'm not saying the word art, but anyone looking at it would reasonably assume that it means art. That's why when we see swear words that are got hashtag and whatever in them, we know what the word means, so that it conveys the same meaning.
Yeah, I'm just thinking in my head, we don't even have the resources that we need to regulate some of these horrendous things that are going on in the plastic surgery community in the US. When I'm talking about people getting seriously injured, seriously hurt, botched operations, those kinds of things. I mean, that stuff isn't even being regulated here. So I'm thinking, even if we were able to pass anything, who would regulate it? Who would possibly be able to monitor the social media of all of these providers? And it's just increasing by the day. I mean, more and more, we're seeing more and more surgeons leaving areas like, you have pediatricians that are saying, oh, I'm going to go, start doing cosmetic surgery now. We have all of these people graduating with, nursing degrees that are shifting in towards the cosmetic space. So it feels really overwhelming to think about how that would be able to be regulated in any kind of a meaningful way. But it sounds like you guys are, taking the right steps. You have these guidelines in place. And so the next steps, you said you have these guidelines, the new guidelines have been passed, but that only pertains to the cosmetic surgeons, right? So now you're trying to get a similar set of guidelines passed for, the non-invasive, or not non-invasive, but non-surgical cosmetic procedures.
Yeah, so we're waiting on those. The draft ones are out, but they're the regulator said actually just on the weekend that they're maybe 2-3 months away before they come out, and then industry has about 3 months to get in line, and which most won't, because they'll push back. Yeah, so
are people freaking out? Are people losing their minds?
Oh yeah, they are. And look, I get it. It's they feel picked on, they feel targeted. But the one thing we keep saying is no other industry in the medical sector can advertise the way you all have been advertising. No one can. So it's actually been really unfair to every single other medical professional out there who's been watching you get away with this for far too long, and you've experienced a boom as well. So your industry is booming, and their industry might not be, but they're not allowed to advertise in that way, but you have been allowed to. So it's really just bringing it back into line with the way everyone else is expected to behave. We've tried to illustrate, as well, I think Michael had a really good point about, what standard do you want to put out there as a doctor, as a nurse. Because if a judge watches all your TikTok videos because you're being sued, even just by one patient, I mean, what are they going to think? Are they going to think, wow, you must be a really ethical person, you're there twerking, or you're there doing the latest TikTok trend for children, or whatever it might be? You're not sort of coming across as someone respectable, right? So trying to help the industry reform from within, not just on the outside. We're trying to help them sort of recalibrate and go back to their training, not what they're seeing online.
Yeah, on that, when we first started this, we started reading codes of conduct that the boards have for their practitioners. And when you read the code of conduct, you would assume that most of them would have been booted out. Like so many, or the ones that we're looking at online, the ones that are behaving in the way, they would have been kicked out of their college, or the board would have booted them out based on not meeting that high standard of the code of conduct. But when you actually sort of start speaking with these organisations, what you learn is it's essentially they'll keep you unless you're a convicted criminal. So that's the actual standard. Just don't get convicted of a crime that carries 12 months in jail. Otherwise, you're okay. Just, do better, maybe.
Yeah.
If someone points it out. And that's really, really disturbing, because the code of conduct means nothing then. It shocked us a lot. It did. What's really interesting about these changes too is you'll watch some really prominent people from the space, surgeons, plastic surgeons, GPs, nurses, or whatever, that have big practices and really suggest to the public they're very ethical. And when these rules came out, you see them all in the comments of their social media accounts carrying on like children. Oh, we're not allowed to say injectables anymore. I'll just say, I'll come to me and I'll stab you in the head. And then another surgeon will jump in and go, ha, 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 yeah, that's a great idea. And then they'll say something about the regulator. Oh, they're idiots. They don't know what they're doing. Oh, we should totally trick them. And you're thinking, like, are you 15 years old?
Yeah.
You're
and why would you be posting that online?
I know. And it's like they have to know that the regulator has access to the internet. I know they didn't have a great history of looking at it, but it's like, where did the standards go?
Yeah, it's really hard. And, social media is just making it even harder. Wow. Well, I want to wrap up here shortly, but is there anything else pertaining to, kind of anything that's going on in the cosmetic world that you guys want to mention or touch on before we wrap up?
I think a big reason why these rules were brought in was because patients were expected to do their own research and understand who a good doctor was compared to a bad doctor, right? And then using social media to do that. And it's just impossible, because often doctors can't even tell, So it's like expecting patients to be able to understand that, work out who's the best. It's just, it's a huge problem. And I think the regulator just wanted the doctors to just start behaving properly so that patients weren't being misled or being sold a dream, because this doctor has X amount of followers, so they must be good, right? They must be, because why would they be so famous? Or they're on TV. Why would a TV station get them on TV if they weren't any good? So I think in jurisdictions where that's sort of not possible, like the US, I actually think people like yourself are really important, because you're able to give an unbiased voice for patients to listen to help protect their interests. And we're big supporters of what you do. We love your work. And I really want to congratulate you for what you're doing, because you must be upsetting some people. It's hard. It's hard to sort of be a voice on the other side.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you saying that. And I have definitely received some nasty messages for, some of the posts that I've done, and really doing nothing more than just regurgitating, something that is already public record. But, like I was saying earlier, it's a tough industry to criticize, and it is a very tight-knit industry. And Really all I'm trying to do is just bring awareness and education to the best that I can, because, like you were just saying about patients having this burden of doing their own research and finding the best provider. It's really, really difficult to do, almost impossible to go out on your own and do. You can't possibly know everything that's going on behind the scenes in these practices, and what these surgeons put out online, is not always reflective of the work that they're doing. And a lot of it is just smoke and mirrors. And unfortunately, there's really no way for the patients to be able to figure out who is legitimate and who is not. And I don't know, there's so many issues, and every day I go down a rabbit hole of something else, and I'm like, oh no, what are we gonna do? What are we gonna do about this? And it can feel really overwhelming sometimes, and I'm sure you guys have felt that as well. So I really, commend all the work that you're doing and the awareness that you're bringing as well. And all we can do is just chipping away at a really, really big mountain, and progress is progress. So
we're hoping that we can actually start speaking overseas. We actually spoke about a week ago at a big industry event run by the plastics teachers injecting, essentially. So there was people from all over the world that came to this event, and it's the first time we've been invited to an industry event, essentially by an industry that probably largely doesn't like us, but they were devoted, the organisation were devoted to talking about ethical advertising. We really want to take that message around the world, to actually, just because we had people from the industry come up to us after it and say, I actually never considered those points. When a patient comes to me and has a concern about one thing, and I start saying, oh, maybe we can do this and maybe we can do that, I'm actually probably projecting issues onto them that they hadn't even thought about. And she's like, maybe I'm part of the problem. And not that we're trying to blame anyone, but we're trying to make people think about the language that they're using, the images that they're using, and how that impacts the viewer and even them. So that's really what we want to take that around the world and just see if we can get that discussion happening. And even if we can just change it by 10%, that's got to be good, right?
Wow. Well, we definitely need you to come over here. I can already tell you that no one will like you. They're gonna want to send you guys right back to where you came from. But I think we definitely need some drastic changes over here, because a lot of the things that are going on, it's just crazy. You said something earlier about, we didn't even realize that we needed to have these guidelines in place. We just expected that these surgeons were going to be doing, what they're supposed to be doing, right? And that's just not the case. And especially when you have an industry like cosmetic surgery and cosmetic procedures, where these are not medically necessary things. It is, at the end of the day, yes, there are people that go into this because they want to help people and make people feel better about themselves, and I fully understand that. But at the end of the day, I mean, it's a huge money industry, right? And there's so much money to be made, and it's just growing. I mean, I look at the statistics of what they're saying about plastic surgery and non-invasive treatments and all these things. I mean, it's expected to it's already grown so much in the last few years, and especially since COVID, and since social media has really just become such a huge thing, and it's just going to continue to grow and grow. We're going to see more people draw to the industry who are they're just solely interested in the money that they can make. They're not interested in, the patients and helping people. So this is going to be an ongoing problem. And there's going to definitely, we need regulation. We need guidelines. We need rules. We need people to enforce the rules once we get them in place. But I hope that we can get you guys over here on our side of the ocean and help us out, because we need some We need some help here. Thank you guys so much for being here today. I have learned so much about the advertising rules in Australia. Again, I'm pretty blown away. So I really appreciate you guys being here and talking to me about all of this. I think the listeners are really going to enjoy this episode, and I hope to have you guys back on again soon. Maybe we'll have you come back on once the other set of guidelines gets passed, and we could talk about how that's going. And I'm sure there'll be some other interesting topics that we can talk about down the road too. But thank you so much for being here, and I look forward to seeing the continuation of the work that you guys are doing.
Thanks for tuning in to today's episode of the Beauty Justice Podcast. For more content like this, follow along with me on Instagram at BeautyJusticeWit. If you want to switch to toxin-free makeup but you're not sure where to start, get my free guide, Clean Up Your Makeup, today by clicking the link in my bio or visiting my website at beautyjustice.com. I'll see you next time. The contents of this podcast are for informational and educational purposes only. Nothing you hear should be construed as legal or medical advice.